Now, in order to get started writing Angular code and in order to learn Angular, we of course need an Angular project where we can put that code in which we can run and test. And here it turns out that you can't just create an empty folder and add an HTML file and maybe a JavaScript file or something like that. And the reason for that is that when you write Angular code, when you build an Angular project, you'll use many features that don't work like that in the browser out of the box. Angular uses a certain syntax in the HTML code, for example, which is non-standard, and it, for example, also uses TypeScript, as I mentioned before. So you need to write TypeScript code, which isn't difficult, as you'll see. You don't need to know it in order to take this course, but it doesn't work in the browser out of the box. It needs to be converted to JavaScript. And for all these reasons, since these things don't work out of the box like that in the browser, you need to create an Angular project that comes with certain tools that translate that code, that compile that code to code that does run in the browser. And along the way, it also would be nice if that code would then also be optimized. And that's why the Angular team created the Angular CLI, the Angular command line interface, which is a tool that simplifies the process of creating Angular projects, but which is also a tool that's then in the end used behind the scenes by those projects whenever you run your development testing server or when you build your app for production to perform those mentioned compilations and optimizations. So it's a crucial tool you'll work with all the time as an Angular developer, though most of the time you'll just use it behind the scenes automatically. Nonetheless, you need to install it in order to create Angular projects and in order to work on those projects. Now, attached you find a link to this Angular CLI page, and there in the local setup area, you learn how to install the Angular CLI and how to then use it, though I'll show you the crucial basic usage you'll need for this course and for most Angular projects in this course, of course. We'll also dive a bit deeper into the Angular CLI and what you can do with it in later sections. To get started and create an Angular project, you, as a first step, need to install the CLI with help of this command. And for this command to work, you actually need to install another tool first. And this other tool, if you want to call it like this, would be Node.js, which is a JavaScript runtime that allows you to run JavaScript outside of the browser. Now, we don't need it because we'd write any Node.js code in this course. Angular is not a Node.js framework, it's a browser-side framework in the end. But the Angular CLI actually needs Node.js in order to work, and you also need NPM, the package manager that comes together with Node.js, in order to execute this command and install Angular. Therefore, you should visit nodejs.org and from there download the LTS version, whichever version that might be at the point of time you're viewing this. And once you did download it, go through its installer, and here I'm using macOS, but it will automatically download the right installer for the operating system you're using. Of course, you can follow along on Windows as well. It's not a macOS only tool, and Angular also works on all operating systems. So walk through that installer and basically confirm all those defaults. And once you then completed that installation, you'll then have Node.js and also this NPM tool installed on your system. And with that, you're then ready to execute this command and install the Angular CLI. So that's what I'll do next. I'll copy this command. And then with that command copied, you should open the default system terminal or command prompt on Windows and execute that command there, though on Mac OS and Linux, you might need to add sudo in front of this command to give it the right permissions. And you might be prompted for your password. On Windows, sudo is not needed and won't work there. So that will now install this Angular CLI, this command line interface, globally on our system. And with it installed, you're now ready to finally create a new Angular project. For that, you should navigate in your terminal or command prompt into the folder where you want to create that Angular project. And once you're there, you can create that project by running the ng new command. This ng command here is now available with the Angular CLI installed. And the new command is then a command supported by the ng command in the end to create a new Angular project. You now also need to give that project a name, for example, first-angular-app. And the name can be anything you like, but you should not include whitespace into that name. And it's also a good convention to keep it all lowercase and simply separate different words with dashes, as you see it here. You can then hit enter and you'll get asked a couple of questions. For example, which style sheet format you'd like to use. So if you want to use plain CSS for styling, or Sass, or SCSS, and here I'll go for the plain CSS option. You might also get asked if you want to enable server-side rendering and static site generation. And it doesn't matter too much what you choose here, but here I'll actually enter N for no here. We'll dive into server-side rendering and what that is later in the course, but for the moment I'll pick no. And that will then go ahead and create this project. You might get asked more questions because those change from time to time, but in that case you can always confirm the default choice by simply hitting enter. And ultimately this new project should therefore be created. Now, in order to work on that project and work on the code, you also need some code editor. And of course here you can use any editor or IDE you want. If you don't have a clear preference, my recommendation would be Visual Studio Code because it's a free and highly extensible IDE that works on all operating systems. Once you did download and install it, you can use it to open that Angular project folder you created with the ng new command, and you should then see something like this. The exact number of files and folders you have here on the left can change over time, and we'll explore in detail what all these files and folders are about at the beginning of the next section. But as you can see, this ng new command created quite a few subfolders and configuration files because we need those extra compilation steps I mentioned before and so on. Now, before we start diving into the code, or before we try running this code and testing it locally, there's one thing you should do here if you're using Visual Studio Code. You should go to the extensions area of this code editor, and then there search for Angular. And you should at least install this Angular language service extension here, because that will give you better IDE support for Angular. It will help with finding errors in your Angular code. It will give you code completions. But you also might want to consider installing some other Angular extensions, for example, the Angular Essentials extension, which in the end bundles a couple of useful Angular extensions. And with those extensions added, you're then well prepared to write Angular code, and you can go back to that Explorer view. Now, as mentioned, we'll explore the files and folders we got here, and we'll start writing some useful code in the next course section. But one thing I want to do right now already is run this project and preview it locally, because that's something we'll do all the time whilst writing code, because of course we want to preview that code and preview our changes to test them locally before we deploy something to production. Therefore, you can and should open the integrated terminal here in Visual Studio Code by going to Terminal, New Terminal, which uses your default system terminal or command prompt, just integrated here into this code editor and automatically navigated into this folder, which is very useful, because you need to be navigated into that folder to run this project and to preview it. And you can then start a local development server by running npm start. This executes a script that's part of this project that spins up a development server, which allows you to preview the website by visiting this address here in your browser. And if you do visit that website, that address, you should see something like this on the screen. The exact content and look can change over time. That's just the automatically generated starting app and will work on different projects throughout the course anyways, so it doesn't matter too much what you see here, but you should see something. And that proves that you were able to run that Angular app and that everything was created correctly. Now, whilst you're working on your code, you should keep that development server up and running. You can hide that terminal, but you shouldn't quit it. You shouldn't stop that process, because as long as this process here is running, it will automatically watch for changes in your code. And whenever you save changes, it'll automatically reload this website and preview those changes, which speeds up the development process. If you're done for the day, you can quit this server by either closing it by clicking this cross or by pressing Ctrl+C. You can then always restart it by rerunning npm start. That's how you create an Angular project and how you prepare everything to work on that code. And that's therefore exactly what we'll do in the next section. We'll dive into a new project, we'll start working on our first demo application, and most importantly, we'll get started with all those crucial Angular essentials you need to know. Now, the question is, how will this course teach you Angular? What can you expect from this course? And of course, you can simply take a look at the course curriculum and dive into the sections that are most interesting to you. That is an option, but the main idea behind this course is in the end that we'll first dive into the essentials. So there are a couple of sections that cover and practice the important Angular essentials. So all the core Angular concepts you will very likely need, no matter on which kind of project you'll be working on, before we then thereafter dive way deeper into Angular. So after the first couple of essentials sections, we'll have many deep dive sections where we'll take a deep dive into components, directives, pipes, services, and dependency injection, and much, much more. That's the main structure, and therefore, of course, you'll get the most out of this course if you follow that structure. So if you take the course section by section, lecture by lecture, but the course is also built such that you can also skip sections and directly dive into the sections that are most interesting to you if you already have some Angular knowledge. Obviously, skipping the essentials sections won't be a good idea if you don't have that basic Angular knowledge, but if you do have it, you can of course go ahead and dive right into the services section if that's what you're interested in. It's also worth noting that this course in the end is, you could say, the combination of two courses, because I completely re-recorded and updated this course to cover modern Angular features like standalone components and signals right from the start, and you'll learn all about them throughout this course, of course. But I also decided to keep an older version of this course around because there still are many projects out there that do use older Angular versions. And therefore, if you want to learn about the latest and greatest and most modern way of writing Angular code, you can simply keep on watching the videos. You can continue with the next lectures because the more modern sections and lectures come first. But if you know that you'll be working on a project that does not use signals and that does not necessarily use standalone components, if you know that this is the case, you can instead jump ahead to the older Angular essentials, to the old Angular basics, and attached you find a link that will take you right to that section and start there.